Sit back, relax, and I'll turn you over to Mike.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for coming out on Sunday morning. I know that this is always, it's like Sunday morning, first panel. I always feel like I might just have 2 or 3 people and we'll just go for coffee. But I'm glad that, you guys were able to come out. This is cool. I just lost power. There we go. Every now and again, I guess I have to slap it. A few things about what this, I guess I should tell you who I am. Mike Prashon, it also says it there. I'm with the Department of English at MacEwan University, and most of what I do at these events, I don't really get to teach in my class. Like occasionally I get to put in something like War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds, as the novel in my intro literature class. Or I get to teach a course with our fine arts campus on adaptation, and that allows me to talk about stuff like science fiction. And I do a course on world literature where I get to talk about Beowulf, but to talk about Aliens and Beowulf together, I have to come to an event like this, and so I'm always glad to get the opportunity. I want to say a few things about what this isn't before I get started so I don't disappoint anybody. This is not going to be an evaluation of which of the Aliens movies is the best, nor why they think Alien 3 perhaps sucks, or why Alien Resurrection is probably best understood, as a friend of mine on Twitter has said, as fan fiction. It's not going to be, I'm not referencing outside the trilogy for the most part. It might happen extemporaneously, but I have no intention of going there. And I'm using the special edition of the third film because my memory of the theatrical release is fuzzy at best, and when I went to rewatch it, prepping for this, I remembered why I didn't want to rewatch it, and I went to the special edition of the third film. So if I'm referencing that and you're like, wait, that didn't happen in the theatrical, I understand. And it will have nothing to do with Prometheus, and that has nothing to do with, that's okay, yeah, if you hate it, then you're happy. If you love it, just know I enjoyed it and haven't watched it rigorously. Like, I haven't sat and watched it with sort of a, you must do something with the Alien canon. I was just like, okay, Ridley Scott, here's your movie. Go ahead and do whatever. And maybe I was just really tired when I watched it, but I enjoyed it. But this is not going to be about that. Instead, this is just a look at how, I think almost by complete coincidence, I don't think you can say that there was any intention on the filmmakers' parts, just given, firstly, that we have 3 completely different directors, and then the third film went through so many script iterations, there's no way we can say that somebody at the outset said, what the Alien series will be is another take on Beowulf. But there are ways in which the Beowulf poem and what it does informs Aliens, and Alien 3 in terms of what they're doing with their themes, with their settings, some of what's going on. I think it just enlarges our understanding of it. And if nothing else, it gives us an opportunity to have a comparison between what gets rendered in Zemeckis' animated feature as this icon of machismo, the hero as kind of individual, comparing that with Sigourney Weaver breaking that new ground, so much of what was talked about last night at Aliens Exposed, where, I remember reading a book about movies you could show to your church youth group, because I used to work with kids and youth, and there was all these movies you could and you couldn't watch, and the reason you shouldn't watch Alien and Aliens wasn't because something came out of John Hurt's chest, or because there would be, all this gore and stuff. You shouldn't watch it because Sigourney Weaver, as Ripley, was taking male roles that are essentially male roles that only men should have. And this was a book that was back in the 80s, and I remember in the 80s going, you gotta be kidding, right? But that's indicative of how outside the norm it would be to have not just a woman taking agency, but a woman packing heat. And doing it in a way that was nothing like, Carrie Fisher, when you go back and you look at the Star Wars movies, you can see she's the only one who can do a crack shot. It's almost like Han Solo got lucky with Greedo at certain points. But Carrie Fisher can shoot, well, she can't shoot Princess Leia can shoot, right? But still, Lucas removed a lot of her agency in the film. She was still relegated to some of the traditional roles that a woman would have. It was radical for the 80s, but it wasn't nearly as radical as what was going on with Sigourney Weaver and the Alien franchise. And I think that comparison alone is a very interesting one, where you take a very traditional male heroic type and you put a woman in that space. This isn't just quick transposition, though, where it's like dress a woman up in a man's clothes. This is definitely a shift that brings the gender along with it, that doesn't lose that. It's not just chicks with guns with Sigourney Weaver. So those are the things that I think are of interest here. I'll get on with this, because otherwise I'm just going to be prattling the whole time. And I'm gonna do my best to save time at the end for us to have a conversation. This whole thing began when I was doing some of my graduate coursework, and I had the opportunity to write a term paper on Beowulf. And being who I am, I wanted to look at Beowulf movies, adaptations of that poem. And as I reflected upon what made up the poem and what these films were doing, I got to thinking, you know, each of these in their own way does something different with the Beowulf characters. Zemeckis' film wasn't out when I did the actual study, but you know, looking back on that paper afterwards, I'm still able to say each of these questions the idea of heroism in one way or another. There wasn't much in the way of sort of an unabashed adaptation of Beowulf, where Beowulf is the hero, Grendel is the monster. We're not going to question any of those things. Mostly what happens in these other versions, with maybe the exception of the 13th Warrior, is that the idea of the monstrous is questioned. It's a sympathy for the devil, it's sympathy for Grendel. And a lot of this comes out of the work of John Gardner, who wrote a book called Grendel. It was all from Grendel's perspective. I'll tell you guys the plot of Beowulf in just a moment if you don't know. But Grendel's sort of the monster, because most people couldn't afford to have a dragon until Zemeckis did his version, or in the 13th Warrior, the dragon was a string of people with torches. But there was a questioning of the hero, especially in Beowulf and Grendel. There's this wonderful scene where Beowulf is shouting up the hill at Grendel, and Grendel's throwing rocks at him and hitting him in the head and taunting him. And Beowulf's like, "Why won't you just come down and fight?" And he has to get everything translated because Grendel speaks this proto version of whatever they're talking, and he calls back down, because I don't have a problem with you. I have a problem with the king. I have a vendetta with the king. So we have the sympathy for the monster that the original poem doesn't have. And I wondered, where is there an adaptation of Beowulf that doesn't make that question, that doesn't question the hero? Well, Predator would be a pretty good version of Beowulf, because you have some guys coming from another land, that whole opening scene with the helicopter getting out. Schwarzenegger, I mean, who better to play Beowulf than Schwarzenegger in the 80s, right? And he comes to this land that is plagued by some sort of monster that nobody can deal with except for him and his team. And then they go in, and they all nearly die. And finally, you know, in almost a way where the Predator becomes both Grendel and Grendel's mother, Schwarzenegger confronts him in this underwater, not in a real underwater, but he does go off that waterfall into the lake and whatnot. It all sort of worked as the same schema, the same storyline that you see from Grendel to Grendel's mother. And here we're almost to the full plot of Beowulf if you don't know it, but I'm going to get there. But my thinking about Predator almost immediately led me to Aliens, just by moment of nostalgia. What movies did I sneak into that were rated R when they were released when I was just a teenager? And Aliens was one of them. I will never forget the trailer for Aliens. The first trailer I saw for Aliens was soundless. It was just this strobe, you know, all those strobing scenes. And so we were just seeing flashes in the theater and wondering, what am I watching? And then the sequel to Alien, we all lost our minds. So that's really burned into my imagination. And Aliens alone works the plot line of Beowulf. We could just do that. And I really, for the longest time, that's all I went with, was Aliens was like a version of Beowulf. Now, for those of you who don't know Beowulf, is anybody who doesn't know Beowulf? Okay, then I should just do this very briefly. And this is just the plot. Let's understand this. There's a lot of other things going on in this poem, but this is not so much about those other things today as it is about this, this plot that becomes, to some degree, archetypal. And I want to make sure that I'm defining my terms. When I say archetypal, I don't think that every culture in the world works off this scheme. Because one of the things that, that I've learned, that my students learn in world literature, is that just because it's archetypal in, say, Western culture, will not mean that it's archetypal outside that culture. And as a very easy example, the dragon on the end. Dragons in Western culture up until, you know, I can't put an exact point on this, but you've got, you know, we since Aragon is a really easy thing to say, but even before then we had friendly dragons, right? But that's not, you know, going back further and further, a dragon is always a monster, and there's no question about it. Tolkien, speaking about Beowulf, said that the dragon is a particular type of monster, and it's nothing, and he didn't put it this way because he's a philologist. There's nothing to sneeze at, right? We don't just sort of throw it away. But a dragon in the West is almost always, as you go back through literature, evil, terrible, devastation. A dragon in the East, wisdom, knowledge, help. That's different. So when I say archetype, if I say archetypal, you know, and I'm really quoting Seamus Heaney here, I don't mean for everyone in the world. So I think this is primarily a Western story type.